Our text is in 2 Peter. It'll be near the back of your Bible, one of the last books in the New Testament. And remember, this is written by one who walked with Jesus, who heard Jesus teach, who walked on the water, the only one of the disciples who did that, got out of the boat, actually walked on the water for just a little bit. And he had really a complicated history with Jesus. He denied Jesus there the night before the crucifixion, yet Jesus restored him in John chapter 21. It was Peter who preached that incredible sermon on the day of Pentecost, and 3,000 souls came to Christ, and the Lord has used him greatly. It's now the end of his life, and this will be the last letter he'll write, at least one that comes to us in the Bible. He's facing imminent death, and so he's given these final instructions to believers. And he begins by saying that your faith is just like mine. He writes these letters to those who have a faith of equal standing with his. That's a marvelous thing. And then he reveals to us that God has given us everything we need for life and godliness. There's nothing we need in order to be obedient to him, to fulfill the commands that he's given us that we don't have available to us. So let's begin reading in verse 3, just to remind ourselves of this. I'm going to read all the way down through verse 11, but our focus this morning will be on verses 5 through 9, so pay especially close attention to that. Verse 3, his divine power has granted to us, perfect tense, has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and to excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that's in the world because of sinful desire. Now, for this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love. For if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being ineffective or unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. For whoever lacks these qualities is so nearsighted that he's blind, having forgotten that he was cleansed from his former sins. Therefore, brothers, be all the more diligent to confirm your calling and election. For if you practice these qualities, you will never fall. For in this way will be richly provided for you an entrance into the eternal kingdom of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Tanya and I are coming up on our 40th anniversary. You know, back more than a year ago, I planned a great getaway. She turned 60 the last week of December, and I had us a place to go out of the country, rented a condo on the beach, and, you know, that didn't happen. And now the 40th anniversary is coming up, and doesn't look like going to be much of a getaway for that one either. But it'll eventually come, you know. But you can't help but when you hit these big milestones, you reflect back. I mean, we've been together for 40 years. And you've heard me tell before just how quickly we fell in love. People ask, do you believe in love at first sight? Well, we do. It's not what we ever wanted for our sons. But, you know, I didn't want them coming home saying, hey, I met the girl I'm going to marry today, and we're engaged. I never wanted that for them, but it's pretty much what happened with us. When I fell in love with Tanya, man, I was in. We were both in. We were in. We wanted to be married. It was just fast. And I loved her, man. I loved her immediately. I loved her intensely. I wanted her. I wanted to spend my life with her. I wanted to wake up in the morning with her. I wanted to bring her coffee. I wanted to have children with her. I wanted the whole thing. I loved her. I loved her deeply. I loved her immediately. And then we got married, and I found out something. Love was not enough. Now, if you're married, you know what I'm talking about. You know, there have been times I've said, I love her. I've never questioned whether or not I love her. But man, there have been times I just didn't want to be around her. And I don't put that on her. That's on me. She's truly the best person I know. But love's not enough. I had to add to that love. I had to add things like patience, understanding, and manners. She sort of wanted me to use manners, you know, please, thank you, and excuse me, all that stuff. I didn't think you had to do that at home, but I learned you do. Tanya and I have taught, you know, hundreds of marriage seminars, and one of the things we teach people is you got to sweat the small stuff. That small stuff really, really matters. It's not just the big stuff. It's the little kindnesses and graces every day. Now, this is precisely what Peter is reminding us as believers. The Christian life begins only one way. There's only one beginning to the Christian life, and it's faith. You can't be saved apart from faith. The Bible tells us very clearly, without faith, it is not unlikely or hard to please him. It's what? It's impossible to please him. It was faith that God counted as righteousness for Abraham and for every other believer since then. There's only one way to be saved, and it's through faith. By grace are you saved through faith, that not of yourselves. It's the gift of God. It's not of works, lest anyone should boast. The Christian life always begins with faith. And I want you to hear me say this clearly, plainly, unequivocally. Faith is sufficient for salvation. You're saved by faith and faith alone, not faith plus anything. It's not faith plus works. It's not faith plus baptism or church membership or sacraments. It's faith and faith alone that saves. But sanctification is a different thing. Sanctification is hard work. In other words, once you're saved, now God has called you to grow and to grow more like Christ, and that doesn't happen automatically any more than having a great marriage happened automatically just because we loved each other. It took hard work. Salvation is completely free. Discipleship will cost you everything. It'll cost you all your time, your money, your determination, your mindfulness. It will cost you everything. So what Peter is telling us here is that true faith becomes a foundation for the Christian life, but it's not the goal, right? It's only the thing that enables the goal. And he makes it really clear here that the Christian life is the process of supplementing your faith, adding to your faith. You can't be contented. Well, I have believed in Jesus. That's all I need to do. No. He says, because God has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who has called us to his own glory and virtue. And because he has granted to us, given to us these exceedingly great, these greatest, he uses the superlative here in Greek, the greatest precious promises so that we can become partakers of his own nature. We're not bound by our wicked, sinful human nature anymore. We can partake, we can share in God's nature. All right, since he has done all of that, that's the indicative, right? The indicative just describes a fact. So the indicative, here's what God did. Unilaterally, he did it. He's given it to you. It's yours. Now here comes the imperative that follows the indicative. Because he's done that, here's what you got to do. You got to add to your faith. And what I add to my faith with, notice, he gives us a couple of qualifiers here. First of all, after he describes what God has given for us, that indicative of God's provision, he says, now for this very reason, make every effort. I like to use the word ardor. That's a word people don't use much, but they should. It's a great word, ardor, A-R-D-O-R. With ardor in spirit, it means zeal, It means enthusiasm. It means determination. It means giving it all you've got. If you're a wrestler, you go out on the mat and you've got one goal, and that's to pin your opponent. And you go at it with everything you've got. If you're a football player and you're a halfback and your goal is to make it to that goal line, you do it with everything you've got. This is the way Peter says we've got to live the Christian life. It's with an ardor and spirit. He says, bringing to bear all, he uses a Greek word here, spude. You may not be familiar with that word. I don't think there are any English words that come from it, but you've seen it before in the Bible. I know because I've preached it to you. When we were going through the Gospel of Luke, and Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, and his last stop before he gets to Jerusalem was Jericho in Luke's Gospel. Remember? On the way in, he meets the blind beggar, and on the way out, there is a diminutive publican who wants to see Jesus, and so he ascends a tree. And Jesus, passing that way, looks up in the tree and he says, Zacchaeus, spusas katabiti. Zacchaeus, come down with haste, with zeal, with ardor. Hey, man, there's urgency here. Get down out of that tree right now. I'm going to your house. That's what this word means. Jesus used the verb. Here, Peter uses the noun. He says, bringing to bear all spude, all of this zeal, this ardor. The ESV translates it, making every effort. Yeah, it's urgent. This isn't something you can do halfway. The Christian life is not to be lived in some lackadaisical, maligning way. It is to be done with ardor, with zeal, with enthusiasm. I've got to bring to bear all that I've got in me. Not to be saved. I'm already saved. Jesus accomplished my salvation, but sanctification is going to take everything I've got. People aren't saved by their efforts, but grace saves no one to make him inert and inactive like a log or a rock. Grace animates its recipients. God has been diligently at work with us. Now we must diligently work with him. And we take this ardor in spirit, and then we have an application in life. We bring this to bear in order to, the word is translated supplement here in the ESV, and this is a fascinating word too. To supply, to outfit our faith, to adorn our faith. Now, this word has a great history in Greek. You guys know that I love etymology. I love the history of words. I like to know where they come from. And this word that Peter uses has a fascinating history in Greek because hundreds of years before Peter used it, it had a very specific meaning. It was used, like, say, in Athens. Athens was the height of, they called it the golden age of Greece. Around AD 400, you had playwrights like Aeschylus and Euripides. You had the comics like Aristophanes, and they were writing, and this was very popular. Plays were extremely popular in Greek culture. Go to Ephesus today, and you can see that theater reconstructed there. It seats about 25,000 people. Now, you think about it. There's no public address system. There's no amplification. And actors would act on the stage, and they would pack this out. 25,000 people would come to see a play. The actors it would be a stage much like this. If you go on a trip with me to Israel, we go to Caesarea Maritima, and there we go in the theater. It's beautiful, and it's been reconstructed. It's a classic Greco-Roman theater. They would put plays on, and when the actors acted, they did it with a mask. They would hold a mask on a stick, and the mask would portray the character that they were playing. And by the way, this act was called, to be an actor, was to be a hypocrites, which is where we get our word hypocrite. and you would have the main characters acting out the play, but backstage, in the back of the stage, would be a group of people in the play, and they're called the chorus. And the chorus would fill in the gaps of action. They would sort of serve as the narrators of the play. And sometimes they would interact with the actors. Sometimes they would inform the audience of what's going on between scenes. And it was really expensive to outfit all those actors in the chorus. And so you know what they would do? They would go to the wealthiest citizens of the city, and they would ask them to pay for the chorus. And there was a verb for it. And it's this verb. Will you outfit the chorus? And that person would be called the choregus, the guy who pays for the chorus. If you know anything about Athenian history, the greatest leader in Athenian history was Pericles, and this is how Pericles basically entered public life. Before he ever became the great leader of Athens, he let people know who he was by being a choregus, by outfitting the chorus, to supply them. And this was a great honor, and it showed your wealth, your prestige, your influence, and you would supply the chorus. Now, several hundred years later, this verb no longer has that specific meaning. It's not only about a chorus in a play, it's about supplying something at your expense. It's going to cost you to outfit something, to supply something. And this is what Peter's saying. You bring to bear with all zeal, with all ardor. You make every effort to outfit, to supply your faith. Your faith was free. It was a gift of God, but your sanctification, your growth in that faith is going to cost you everything. You've got to supplement your faith. You've got to add to that faith with application to life. This is what you're doing. You're going through life outfitting it. And how do we do it? Well, Spurgeon said of this passage, as we've seen a mason take up first one brick and then another, and then gradually build a house, so are we Christians to take first one virtue and then another, piling up these stones of grace one upon another until we've built a palace for the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. That's a beautiful picture of the Christian life. And Peter here gives us a list of things. Now, I don't believe Peter is giving us, first of all, an exhaustive list. These aren't the only things we would add to our faith. There might be others. Nor is he giving us a sequential list. In other words, I don't think Peter is saying, okay, first you work on virtue. And once you've got that knocked out, then you work on knowledge. And once that's done, then you work on self-control. He's not saying that. He's simply saying this is the task of a lifetime, to constantly be adding to your faith. Things like this, and he gives us a list of the 7 elements that I must add to my faith. Well, first of all, he uses the word virtue. Virtue. And we've seen this word already in this passage, that Jesus Christ is the one who has virtue. He's called us to his own glory, and it's translated excellence up there at the end of verse 3. But it's this word, arete. I told you about it last week. This is where we get the name Aretha. And it means excellence. It could mean excellence of any kind, moral excellence, intellectual excellence, physical excellence. But Peter's using it here, of course, spiritually, that our goal is to we're not just getting by with our faith, but to our faith we want to add this commitment to do everything for the glory of God. This is what Paul says, 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, in word or deed, whatever you do everything for the glory of God. That I can't do anything halfway, and be satisfied that I have fulfilled the calling of God on my life. I don't want to be a halfway husband. I don't want to be an okay preacher or pastor. I don't want to be just an okay grandfather. Whatever God has called me to do, I've got to understand there's no conflict between callings. If there's a conflict, it's because I'm not doing it right. There's no conflict between me being a husband and a pastor. I hear preachers all the time talk about how great a strain it is doing both things. I mean, yeah, are there challenges? Absolutely. But if God's called me to be a husband and he's called me to be a pastor, there's no inherent, innate conflict in those things. If there's conflict there, it's on me. And to admit that to myself is hard. Because I sort of want to take the cop out and say, well, it's just hard. You just can't do this. Sometimes you just can't do it. No. I'm to do it with excellence. I'm to add to my faith this virtue that is committed to do whatever God has given me to do it with excellence, to be excellent in my own demeanor, my study, my words, and everything is to be done with excellence. Now, Peter's told us we all have equal faith, right? We all have faith of equal standing. But it becomes obvious to us very quickly that we don't all have equal commitments to arete, to virtue, to excellence. Well, this is a function of bringing to bear with all zeal, with all ardor, what God has provided for us. We've got the indicative of God's provision. Now, here's the imperative of your effort. Add to your faith virtue, and to virtue, knowledge. Knowledge. The biblical use of the verb know, or the noun knowledge, is interesting, isn't it? It can mean a lot of different things. Adam knew his wife Eve. Now, what does that mean? Well, you know what it means. It means he knew her intimately. Sometimes you'll see in the scriptures that he knew his wife and she conceived. Well, that's an intimate knowledge. That's the knowledge between only a husband and a wife. And that same word is used of our intimate knowledge of God. How is it that we escape the corruption that's in the world through lust? It's through the knowledge of him who's called us to glory and virtue. So now he says you add to your faith excellence, virtue. Now add to your virtue knowledge. You have the commitment to moral excellence. You need to have a commitment also to knowing Jesus intimately. And you don't know Jesus intimately through some strange, weird, emotional experience. You know him through his word. The written word is what teaches us of the incarnate word. Are you adding to your faith knowledge, wisdom? See, there's the knowledge of the facts that even a Buddhist can understand Christianity intellectually. He's not talking about mere intellectual knowledge. He's talking about the ability, led by the Holy Spirit, to take the knowledge we acquire through the Word of God and to apply it to life. To have a wisdom, to know how to respond in certain situations. And then to that wisdom, remember knowledge. What does Paul warn us about knowledge? Knowledge puffs up. So to our knowledge, we need to add self-control. That means literally, the Greek word enkrateia is power inside, power within. And it means that part of my sanctification process is that if God has given me the means by which I can be a sharer of his divine nature, that means I've got the power within not to just react. Oh, here is a beautiful woman, and I don't restrain myself in the way I flirt with her, or I'm inappropriate with her, or I lust after her. Well, that's a lack of that's a lack of self-control, isn't it? We see a lot of that people lack self-control, especially men can lack self-control in that way. We can do it with greed. We can do it with our tongues. We can do it with our mouth. We can do it with our Facebook post. We can do it with Twitter. There are a lot of ways we show a lack of self-control. Someone says something that ticks us off, and we just feel like, well, I just got to respond to that. Not only do Christians do it, sometimes they take pride in it. Well, I'm just the kind of person who just says what I think. Do you honestly think you're going to stand before Jesus, he's going to pat you on the back for that? Do you think that's a good thing? What is self-control? Self-control is the ability to defeat impulses that your flesh might have. And then you add to self-control steadfastness, perseverance. Now, sometimes this word is translated patience. The ESV often translates it patient endurance. It's got the sense of both things. This isn't the same word translated patience, for instance, in the fruit of the Spirit. There, that word means long suffering. But this is similar. It's the capacity to hold out or to bear up in the face of difficulty. You know where this word is used a lot in the New Testament? In the book of Revelation. Let me just show you. In the book of Revelation, if you just turn over a few pages to Revelation chapter 1, you'll see John uses it in his introduction down in verse 9. I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the, here's the word, patient endurance that are in Jesus. Now look at that. John talks about Jesus having patient endurance, and he says he's a sharer. He's a partner in that patient endurance. Why? Because he's been exiled on the island of Patmos. You think that takes patient endurance? And then look down at chapter 2 and verse 2. Here in Jesus' letter to the church at Ephesus, he says, I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance. Verse 3, I know you are enduring patiently. Look down at verse 19. To the church at Thyatira, Jesus commends them. I know your works, your love and faith and service and patient endurance, and that your latter exceeds the first. You turn over to chapter 3, down to verse 10, in the letter to the church at Philadelphia. Because you've kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that's coming on the whole world. Look over at chapter 13, verse 20. Verse 10. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Chapter 14, verse 12. Here's a call for the endurance of the saints who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. Well, I'd say that's a major theme in the book of Revelation, wouldn't you? John is writing to a church that is going through trial and trouble and persecution and tribulation. And he's saying, be patient. Jesus is going to return. The kingdom is going to come. It's going to be realized. But in the meantime, you have to add to your self-control this endurance, this steadfastness, this ability to persevere even in trial. And then to this steadfastness, you add godliness. This speaks of holiness of life, a devoutness, a piety, a godliness. This isn't the fake, phony kind of godliness. You know, sometimes some Christians look like they're suffering from a gallbladder attack. You know, they think that's what holiness looks like. You know, you see these pictures of the so-called Jesus where he's looking so sad and has this doleful look on his face. And there are a lot of Christians that's the way they're going through life. That's not the kind of godliness he's talking about. In fact, I would argue that there's a joy in devoutness and piety. You know the man in my life I feared the most? My dad. I feared my dad. I mean, I feared my dad, and there was no one I would rather be around when I was a kid than my dad. I loved my dad. I loved time with my dad. I still miss my dad. I can't tell you how many Sunday nights I still have the urge to pick up my phone and call my dad, just because we always used to reflect on Sundays together. And here's the man that I feared the most, the man who disciplined me and challenged me, but he was also the man who just gave me such a vision and expanded my horizons even as a boy and encouraged me what I could do and be for the glory of God. And man, I love him. This is what godliness conveys. There's a reverence for God. There's a respect for God. Yeah, I'm not even afraid to use the word fear. There's a fear of God. But that doesn't negate. In fact, I would argue it amplifies our joy, our passion, our desire to know him, to be with him. He's given us everything we need for this, Peter said. He's already told us he's given us everything we need for life and godliness. So here's do you get what Peter's pointing out here? That we aren't adding these things in our own strength and in our own power. This isn't based on the old college try and us giving it, everything we've got. It's the fact that he has already given us everything we need for life and godliness. This is about us availing ourselves of what he's provided. You remember the book of Genesis when God elevated Joseph to be the prime minister? And Joseph knew, he told Pharaoh, there's going to be 7 years of plenty. And then there's going to come 7 lean years. So what was Joseph's strategy? To build up a storehouse, to take 20% of everybody's crops during the years of plenty, and then to dole it out and to sell it to the years of lean. I want you to see, God has already given us his storehouse full of provision, of all of these qualities. It's not a matter of us simply doing it or willing it or trying harder. It is a matter of us appropriating to ourselves what he has provided for us. So that when we face temptation, when we face challenge, when we want to just blow our top and speak our mind or whatever the temptation may be, we stop and remind ourselves, God's already given me the way to deal with this. He's provided this for me, but I have to take the time to appropriate what he's provided. He's given me everything I need for life and godliness. Okay, now I'm in a moment where I need to apply this godliness. So I thank him for it. I take it. I apply it. And to godliness, Peter says you've got to add brotherly affection. I call this warm kindness. It literally means brotherly love. We've got a city with this very name, the Greek word Philadelphia. That's what this word is in the text. He says you add brotherly love, this warm affection that you have for others. It's so easy in our disagreements, in such a divisive time as we've endured with the challenges. And, it's like we're not bound together anymore by whether or not we're followers of Jesus. We're trying to find somebody who thinks the way we do about critical race theory or whether or not to wear a mask and who they voted for. And it's like the theology that ought to unite us just sort of gets forgotten. And yet here Peter's telling us, no, you don't get to pick and choose who you have brotherly love for, to whom you show this warm affection. That's part of being a believer. Jesus himself said it. Well, if you love those who are like you, if you love your friends, what good is that? Anybody can do that. The Gentiles do that. I'm calling you to love your enemies. Boy, there's the word. I don't believe these qualities, these character qualities, are sequential. But I also can't neglect the fact that this last one does seem to be the pinnacle, the peroration, if you will, of all the others, because the greatest thing, Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 13, is love. Love is a passionate selflessness. In his first epistle that we studied a few years ago, chapter 4 and verse 8, Peter's already told us, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. You know, that's one thing that Tanya and I had to add to our love for one another, is a depth of love that would overlook one another's faults and failures and past. You know, it's this love that covers a multitude of sins doesn't mean it neglects sin. No, love deals with sin properly, but it covers it. It doesn't hold the grudge. It forgives. Did you catch the passage that Pastor Chris read? Jesus comes to a fig tree and it has no fruit. And what does he do? He curses it. He curses it. When they come back the next day, the disciples say, Lord, look, this fig tree's dead. What does Jesus say? I'm telling you that if you have faith, you can say to this mountain, you be cast into the sea, and it'll be so. Jesus isn't talking about faith to get to get a new Mercedes or a lake house. He's talking about the faith to uproot those things in your life that bear no fruit. This is exactly what Peter's driving us to. Look what he says. Here's the guarantee. Verse 8, if these qualities are yours and are increasing. Oh, man. Notice how Peter put both things in there. Lest we think that we can somehow check each one of them off of a list. Okay, I've got godliness knocked out. I've achieved that now. No, these things have to be in you and increasing. They're growing. They're abounding. You never arrive. You never get to some place where, okay, I can cross that off the list. I have accomplished that. No, you're always growing in these things. These things are relative because you're still in your flesh, and your flesh cries out for satisfaction, and your flesh shows itself more than you will want it to. And that's why it's a continual process that you have to keep adding these things to your faith. But if these things are in you, and if they're increasing, they will make you, well, Peter uses a double negative, which Greek does that. English doesn't do it. Greek piles them up. And here's what he literally says. They make you that you will not be ineffective and unfruitful in the knowledge of Jesus Christ. In other words, if the guarantee of adding these things is, first of all, I will be effective. But can I just ask you, do you want your Christian life to be an effective Christian life? Or are you content with being an ineffective Christian? Oh, I got saved and baptized. You know, I'm going to heaven. Rest doesn't matter. Well, Peter's challenging that notion. If you're adding these things to your faith, if you're growing in these things, they make you that you will be effective and you will be fruitful. And what that means is my knowledge of Jesus will result in my likeness to Jesus. How is it that I become effective and fruitful? It's in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is 3 times now. Since verse 1, he's talked about the knowledge of Jesus. It's through knowing him that we grow. The more I know him, the more I love him. The more I love him, the more I want to be like him. And the more I am like him, the more these virtues become obvious in my life. But here's a warning. If you don't do this, if you fail to add these things, he says in verse Verse 9, whoever lacks these qualities is so nearsighted that he's blind, having forgotten that he was cleansed from his former sins. Failure to add these things brings spiritual nearsightedness. Now, this catches my attention because I'm nearsighted. I can still read fine without my glasses, but I can't distinguish any of you. I take these glasses off. Robert Farley's good looking for all I know. I can't see him. I know that's who that is simply because I noticed him when I had my glasses on. Right now, I couldn't identify him to save my life. I'm nearsighted. I see things up close. What is spiritual nearsightedness? It's when you only care about the things that are right in front of you, the things that matter to you, the things that have to do with your life and your day and your vacation and your job. But when you are like Jesus, you see the big picture. And you realize it's not about you. And you have a vision of what God is doing in the world, not merely what's happening in your life. Spiritual nearsightedness ultimately ends up, Peter says, in blindness. And akin to it is spiritual forgetfulness. He says, and he has forgotten that he was cleansed from his former sins. Forgetfulness, first of all, about my salvation. Now look, sometimes people say, oh, you need to forget the past. Peter's saying, do not forget the past. Now, you can't be a prisoner to the past. You can't be bound by the past, but don't ever forget it. Because if you forget the past, then you forget that there's a before and an after. And one of two things will happen. Forgetting that you're redeemed leads either on the one hand to defeat and you get stuck in your sinfulness, or else it leads to arrogance, pride, and self-righteousness because you forget the before and you think you did the after. No. When you realize what you were, or if you were saved as a child, what you would have been, could have been, had God not saved you when he did, then you realize that it really is all of grace. Even the ability to add these things to your faith is still of his grace. Spiritual forgetfulness about my salvation and about my sanctification means that I'm not walking in his provision and in his grace. Listen, you cannot be content with having only faith and think that you're saved. Sanctification is the sign of salvation. Perseverance is the proof of redemption. Christ-likeness is the confirmation of your calling. It's the evidence that you really have been changed by his grace. If my present looks just like my past, then I really can't be certain of my future. If I don't look any different as a believer than I did as an unbeliever, then there's really no proof that God ever changed my heart. This is why Peter says if these things are in you and they abound, they'll make you that you never fall. They're going to guarantee you an abundant entrance into glory. Now, perhaps you realize you can't add to your faith because you've never put your faith and trust in Jesus to begin with. You don't need to worry about sanctification. You need to worry about salvation. And you've got to get that in the right order. There's some people say, okay, well, I'm going to go try and change. I need to make some changes and decisions in my life, and then I'm going to come to Jesus. No, that's backwards. You need to just have simple faith in Jesus, that he died for you, that he rose from the grave for you, that he's conquered Satan, sin, and death for you. And if you'll put your faith and trust in him, this begins a wonderful journey of growing in love with him and growing to be like him. But it begins by simply repenting of your sin and putting your faith in Jesus. But if you've done that, if you know for certain that you've really put your faith and trust in Christ, then you've got to bring everything you've got to bear on this process of sanctification. Because the grace of God to save me is also the grace of God to grow me.